You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
One thing that's not being talked about, Brendan, is the fact that over 20 heroes just got banned.
Yeah. No fun allowed is how I read that one. So yeah, the young heroes are no longer legal in Class Constructed, which is a bummer, to be honest, because I don't know. It was cool that like Prism is so powerful and it's so strong against, a degenerate deck potentially like Oldhim that it can actually be successful in Class Constructed, even played as a young hero. I thought that was cool. I really did. But maybe they want to expand the young hero to like crazier design in the future or something.
Yeah, future proof. I'll tell you what, I definitely in the past 2 weeks have played some games with Young Chain in Class Constructed to see if it was viable. It's pretty strong. Seeds of Agony is a card, that's for sure. Beating Fire, on the other hand, is a bit of a tough. 20 life, not quite enough life to beat Fire. I think give me an extra 5 life, might be able to do it. Anyway, welcome back to Arsenal Pass, episode 78. We are less than 24 hours removed as we record, and less than 72 hours removed by the time this podcast drops on the Thursday/Friday, depending on where you are in the world, from the ban and suspended announcement. The October announcement, which comes off the back of the national season, which preempts the World Championships happening now, Brendan, and by the time this podcast drops in exactly 4 weeks. So not long now to go. And a lot of anticipation for what this ban and suspended announcement would be. Speaking of suspended, we were left in suspense for maybe 12 to 24 hours longer than people expected. I have a sinking suspicion that was because the errata bulletin is massive. We'll get onto that. But today we are going to talk about this ban and suspended announcement, Brendan, and the impacts it has, not just on the Class Constructed, the Blitz format for now, not just in the lead up to Worlds and what we expect from World Championships, but also the impact as Dynasty releases as well, because there are some long-term potential impacts here as well for both formats and with some of the changes to some of the erratas, which we will talk about. Anyway, Brendan, anything to say, or do you want to tell me a bit about your week in Flesh and Blood now that you've spent a week back at home?
Yeah,
how's your sleep schedule?
To say, but I will leave it for later in the pod. My sleep schedule is good. I pretty much dodged jet lag completely. There's one day where I was asleep a bit early, but outside of that, all good. Week in Flesh and Blood, I played a bit of Fab. I actually played an Armory, which is a big step for me. It's been a while. Went down, played an Armory. It was okay. I played Icelander, and this area, I was in Fort Worth, which I don't usually go to, was just mono Dramai. It's like only Dramais. It's like great. And yeah, I've been streaming a bit and playing Icelander on ladder. Probably, almost 100% playing Icelander in the Battle Hard in Dallas this weekend. I was going to play the Blitz portion. I think it's a PTI event on Sunday, but I don't think so anymore, to be honest.
Well, maybe you can tell us why when we get into the main topic of the pod. For me, I dived into some Blitz testing actually prior to these ban suspended announcements. Most of it not gone to waste though, which is good. Was working on decks that weren't Wizard, and looking at some things in the format and just kind of get my head around and we'll talk about it, but we haven't really had much Blitz. So we had the team calling back sort of first half of the year, and we had Skirmish Season 5, which also happened at a really busy time, sandwiched in between Pro Tour, ProQuest season, and Pro Tour number 2. So it was kind of, it was a bit of a tougher one to, I think, maybe take the results from like we maybe could have in previous Skirmish seasons, just so much happening around that time period. So to dive into Blitz, get a little bit of a feel for it. I've been enjoying my game so far, but obviously the format's about to have a big shake-up. Class Constructed also got some games in. I also went to an Armory, went to an event. I'm pretty sure it was an Armory. It was an event. I think it was a Winterbox event. I went O2 drop.
Nice.
Can you guess what hero I was playing?
No, just tell me. I can't guess.
I was playing Reinhardt, so
Yeah, Reinhardt, it's a legit deck. I think if Reinhardt's ever playable in a format, it's usually a sign of a pretty healthy format. But I think he's gonna fade. He's gonna fade away as we head into Worlds.
It's just a little bit on the underpowered side, and every game feels super, super close. But I don't want to play close games. So yeah, got in some Class Constructed, and then I even did a draft, Brendan, an uprising draft, just to shake the rust off before we get into World Championships in 4 weeks. Trying to do a draft every week if I can, just to keep it fresh. Try out a few different things. Some learnings from we talked with Tarek about Limited 2 weeks ago, post Canadian Nationals and my Nationals, and Just a few things that I want to try out before we get to Worlds. Make sure, not missing a beat. Anyway, Brendan, news this week. Well, of course, the headline news is the banned and suspended announcement. I always say restricted every single time, but of course it is banned and suspended announcement now. First of all, we're just going to list these off during the news section, and then once we get into the actual main topic of the pod, we are going to dive into kind of the implications and the surrounding of this and our thoughts on some of the decisions and what's happening in this current ban suspended announcement. So I'm going to flick to the article and just read off the changes that we have. So Classic Constructed, Pulse of Eisenloft is banned, not suspended until Ultima's gone, just banned, effective from October 7th. So date this pod drops. We'll get into the discussion and the philosophy of that. Blitz, Bloodsheath, Skelada is banned. Mask of the Pouncing Lynx is banned. So again, not suspended. Both those cards are gone. Storm Striders, on the other hand, though, is suspended until the banned and suspended announcement, or the next banned and suspended announcement, which I don't know if we have a date for set. We do November 9th. So we'll get a revisit then, which will be upon the release or the week before the release of Dynasty. And then... yeah, and then Sonata Arcanix moves from suspended to legal. So we do keep one half of that Bloodsheath Sonata sort of mini wombo combo, but it's the Sonata back and Bloodsheath Skelada gone.
Not the good part of it.
Well, yeah, Bloodsheath Skelada, we get into it, might be quite good. My early Blitz testing was saying it was. Ultimate Pit Fight. Yorick, Weaver of Tales is banned, but only in official events, Brendan. So when you shuffle up at the kitchen table, you can still play your Yorick with your friends. I think this makes sense. Obviously, shuffling a lot of sleeves in together. We won't talk about Ultimate Pit Fight during the main topic of the pod, so we'll have a little chat about it now. But, I think I had a few things of people going to UPF events, locally at stores and stuff, and feeling a little bit uncomfortable when someone flipped a Yorick. So, makes sense. Yeah,
it looked like it was a ceremonial card at best. So I think that this is the correct decision. I'm surprised it was quote unquote legal ever, to be honest. But I don't even know what legality means in UPF because I didn't know it was actually played in like a real capacity. I think that there's some side events at big tournaments, but that's about it.
I know some local stores do, and you can sanction the events. You can obviously run them through Gem. So that's the change there. And card legality policy update, Brendan, which we did allude to at the top of the show. Adult heroes are for Classic Constructed. Blitz heroes are young heroes. So young heroes for Blitz only. So no more young heroes in Classic Constructed. I believe this might have come off the back of a Prism player at New Zealand Nationals going 3-0 in the first portion of Constructed.
I think that's awesome. I can't get I don't know. I think that is so cool that someone can take a hero at literally half the life and still be successful. I think that shows great innovation. It's a great meta call because it literally has to be a meta call. I mean, Prism at 20 life would just fall over to any just halfway aggro deck. So kind of bummed, but I'm assuming it's so they can open up design space a bit more for the younger heroes.
I think a chain did gain Living Legend points in like the last Nationals or Road to National season or something as well. So, which is quite funny. But yeah, I mean, I guess one that they call out here in this, because we'll talk about this, we won't really dive into it in the main topic of the podcast. I don't think it's that relevant for our discussion, but cards like Shiana, right? Heroes like Shiana, potential for like some busted broken combos in Classic Constructed, just sort of taking over very abruptly and very quickly. And of course, if Blitz, they've talked about Blitz being quite liberal with the ban list and that, I guess, being less tested. So, I can understand, but of course, I wouldn't mind to play Young Chain in an event or maybe Young Prism. So,
yeah.
That does it for, I guess, the bans and suspended sort of announcements. We have a Dynasty spoiler, Brendan. Do just want to remind everyone of that. That's going to be Tuesday, November 1st. Again, reminder, the season does run from October 31st to November 2nd. Really condensed season of previews as we head into Worlds, where, Worlds happens and then Dynasty releases, I think, the week after or the week after that. So I can't remember the dates in my head of what Worlds actually is. So, yeah, I mean... we don't know what our spoiler is yet. Our preview card is Brendan, but I'm sure it's a spicy one. We talked about we theory crafted on what it could be last week. We sort of spitballed, so it's pretty much confirmed it's going to be a Brute Wizard Runeblade card. I
mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Brute Wizard Runeblade. We've already seen the dual class. Why not try?
Exactly. Last piece of news, Brendan, just want to give, of course, a big thank you and shout out to the Arsenal Pass patrons. We do have some more content that's gone up in the past 2 weeks, including we did 2 Patreon pods for the month of September, which are both up now, including Brendan and I tackling the big topic on Twitter. Best player in the world, Brendan, of course, not quite what we actually end up talking about. We more talk about worlds and some players to watch for and kind of a bit more, I guess, theory around this discussion and what this means. And we do have some deck ticks and deck guides up there as well, which are all up on the Arsenal Pass Patreon. Brendan, no Commander Cookout this week, but if you do want to get your questions in, please do drop them in the YouTube comments below, tweet at us, DM us, email to arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. We're pretty light on Commander Cookout questions, so if you get your question in the next 2 weeks, good chance it gets read out before the end of the year. But also we have a pretty juicy topic to talk about this week. So I don't know, Brendan, anything else to say before we dive straight into the main topic of the pod?
I think we just got to go rip this bandit off, talk about these bans.
Uh-oh. That's always ominous from Brendan. Yep, okay, main topic of the pod, the impact of the October ban and suspended announcement on the Flesh and Blood constructed meta in the lead up to Worlds and Dynasty. That is my title of the main topic, not the title of the pod, because that is a mouthful. But, as we survey the landscape of the impact of the latest ban and suspended announcement and what it might do for Classic Constructed, Blitz, between now and Worlds, but also, Brendan, one thing I want to definitely touch on is like the long-term impact with Dynasty, because some of these changes are full bans. They're not suspensions, they're full bans. And even a suspension, as we've seen in the past, can turn into a ban. So we're going to break it down by the two formats and, start with the format that has the biggest changes and impacts in the form of Blitz. And I think you've got some words to say on this. So first of all, let's take a step back before I even ask you about these announcements and the changes. Where do you think the format was prior to these announcements? Like, has Blitz been in a healthy spot? Like I said at the top of the show, we haven't necessarily had events, but you have played some Blitz. I've played some Blitz. We both played the team calling. What was your opinion on kind of Blitz before these announcements?
I'd have to start with define healthy, because Blitz, is it a healthy format? God, I have no idea. Because what's healthy to you, right, is Rhinar killing you on turn 0 by intimidating your entire hand and playing an alpha rampage, with a couple buffs.
Yes.
Is that healthy? Yes. So then it's very healthy, right? Was there decks that could combat Rhinar doing that? I mean, yeah, if he didn't just randomly pull the cards, but there was a lot of degenerate things going on. There was Oldhim, just such a powerful deck in Blitz. There was, of course, I think Wizard was just not, like, Kano was not played very much and also wasn't really converting, but was seen as this like theoretical, very powerful deck. And I think it was. We had decks like Kasai kind of being the mid-range deck of the format. And then we had your run-of-the-mill aggro decks as well. Like we had Chain, we had Briar. And I mean, those are really the big ones, to be honest. But I felt like that's sort of, those kind of define the format. There's a bit of Prism in there as well to really combat the amount of Oldhims. Mm-hmm. I thought when I played in the team tournament, I thought that it was healthy-ish for, like, I felt like it was as healthy as it could be for Blitz, considering the current power level of the game. Blitz back in Skirmish Season 1, like OG, Ira, like I thought that felt healthy. You didn't really have too many deck choices, kind of, because Ira was really, really good. Dorinthia was really, really good. And there was
Kano was very good.
Yeah, but he was not played, and nobody ever saw consistent and real success with him compared to Ira. So like, Ira dominated. That being said, I felt like that format was very balanced, right? Like it felt very fair, and the best player tend to win. I mean, I guess if we're defining balance and a balanced format, I think that one that puts the best player winning more often is probably closer to my definition of balance than, anything else if we're talking about something like Blitz. So I felt like it was balanced back then, and then back at the team, in the team format, I thought it was a good format, although it was crazy, right? You had turn 0 kills, but it was not what we saw previous to that, which was combo Viscerai and Blitz, which was just like, I mean, that was solitaire.
Yeah, that was a one deck format. I think health and balance are two different things in my eyes. So a balanced format doesn't necessarily equal a healthy format, and vice versa. I agree with you. Like the Ira, Dorinthia, Kano format was pretty balanced, but it was also pretty boring, I would say. Like there wasn't that many deck choices. A lot of the matchups, once you played them a few times, they went the same way. The Ira, Dorinthia matchup, once you learned that matchup, went the same way. I felt, some people started to adjust and adapt. The Kano versus Dorinthia matchup was one of the most boring matchups you could play. It just ended on turn 2 either way, and it just came down to like 1 or 2 plays. Which, they can still have it now. What I will say about the format that we've come out of, let's ignore the Viscerai format with Skalada and Sonata, because that sucked, and I can't believe there's a calling for that format. the format for the team calling, there was so many viable decks in that meta. Like even people showing up with like KO and like just rolling people with like these. You could play something that's fun, high rolly as heck, and variance on your side, do well. There was, Ira was still like viable for some people. I think you look across the team calling. Yes, Ultim was like in every single deck in the top 4 of the 3 events. I think maybe one didn't have Ultim. I'm pretty sure all of them did though. And yes, but outside of that, so many other heroes were represented. Like Prism was represented, Rhino was represented, Ira was represented, like Kano. Like there were so many heroes represented in those top 4s of the 3 callings across the world. The format felt quite cool, and I thought, aside teams was a great way to do it as well. Anyway, post that, we didn't really have much. We had Skirmish Season 5. Fi comes out. Fi does really well in that Skirmish Season. Icelander does quite well. It's already starting to show its head in Skirmish Season 4. Skirmish Season 5, Icelander does really well post the release of Uprising. Fi does really well. Kano, like you say, didn't convert that well. But when you look at the Skirmish results, like Kano did do pretty well.
I don't take Skirmish results seriously, though, to be honest. I mean, in major tournaments, Kano has always done terribly in Blitz. That's why I like...
What major tournaments have we had, though?
We've had two full on Blitz callings, then we had the team tournament as well. Like the Kanos in the team tournament actually did not do well. Because like even if you look at the ones that placed high, like Yuanji on Michael Fang's team, and Yongji was there as well. Like Yuanji, who was playing Kano, got carried by his team. He said this. He got carried. He lost like quite a bit of his matches. Alexander Vor as well was in the finals. But then if you look at your region, like that team didn't even have a Kano.
We had Kano on our team.
The Bolton boys. But the Bolton boys.
Yeah, but they were playing.
How did your Kano do, by the way? How was your Kano's record? Not very good, right? Not very good.
Look, exactly. Leave Dan alone,
It's not about player skill. It's just the deck was not actually dominant, right? The deck is not dominant into a format where Briar has Spell Void and Oldhim had Steadfast.
Oldhim was a buy for Kano. Buy.
It was
that matchup was a buy.
Matchup
was a buy. Matchup was a buy for Kano.
Not a buy. I guarantee your Kano losses some old. It's the deck stack to beat that Oldhim Steadfast was legitimately challenging. Tome double blue, double wildfire. It's like it's a enigma to the mind.
I don't know. Dan did it. Dan did it. I think 3 times at that event and won against every single Oldhim, apart from the top 4 Oldhim who just like double pummeled him and he didn't get a chance to stack. Anyway, that's aside. That's where the format was, Skirmish Season 5. I agree. Like, that's what I'm saying. What can you take from the results? But there was a Battle Hardened in Toronto, which was won by Icelander. But the top 8 was really diverse. So it was like Icelander, Dash, Ultim, Ira. I think there's a Rhino, and I think there's 5 or 6 different heroes. There's a Briar. I actually think there's 6 or 7 different heroes in that Battle Hardened top 8 in Toronto. I don't have the deck list up, but I was looking at it yesterday, which was really interesting. So that's kind of the last bigger event we have before this ban suspended announcement. The announcement comes, and there's some, like, I guess, interesting wording in the ban suspended announcement as well. I think we could dive into some of that, but basically, let me just read the top level philosophy of what LSS have said about this ban list, and then we'll get into the cards themselves. But LSS were pretty, I guess, adamant in Fab 2.0 that the philosophy for the ban suspended announcement in Blitz would be really liberal. They would be doing it pretty aggressively. Cards would flux in and out. And, due to the explosive nature of the format, they felt that this could happen at every single ban suspended announcement. So that's kind of, I guess, a bit of background before this ban suspended announcement. Let's go down the list, and because I want to end with one in particular. Let's go Bloodshed Skelata. Like, what are your kind of thoughts on this? My general kind of idea is that my early testing of Blitz, this card is ridiculously powerful, and LSS is basically reasoning for this is the same thing that I'd found, is that you can just generate like 4 resources for free, and that is, you turn this into like hard and cross draft plus plus.
Blitz.
Oh, easy.
Yeah, it's enough to win a game of Blitz. It's great. Yeah. So Bloodshed Skelata, totally understandable in a 20 sub health format. That being said, like Bloodshed Skelata is like one of my favorite cards, but I appreciate how much it limits design. I do. So am I surprised? No. Am I disappointed? Not really. I mean, this is kind of expected in something like Blitz, where getting 4 resources is just ridiculous.
Yeah, my kind of take on the Blitz format right now is like, you need a piece of equipment that's worth like 4 to 5 damage to win games, to consistently win games and be one of the best decks in the format. And Bloodshed Skelata did that for Briar in this format, and even you could play it in Chain and do the same thing. I think it looked a bit, my opinion was it looked a bit better in Briar, but I think Chain could do the same thing. I guess just the ceiling's really high, and that's why they decide to ban it now. And we don't know what's in Dynasty, right? We don't know what's around the corner for ways to, the best way to use this currently was fixing Cool Hand, but you could also do some pretty nutty stuff with Revel and Rune Blood, and we don't know what's in Dynasty, so it could have been more.
Vexing Cool Hand, Blushy Scalata on board is just way too much initial advantage for any deck that's utilizing that, right? Like, not only is the Vexing Cool Hand giving you quote unquote AB, but it also generates 2 rune chance, so effectively 2 damage. That 2 damage reduces the cost of your attack by 2. It's such a free roll and so much more powerful than some of the other equipment that's available. I'm not surprised that it's getting banned.
Yeah, when you go, okay, opponent's turn, just trade in for the block, get 2 life off my Bloodshed Scalata. My turn, pop the Vexing Cool Hand for 2 rune chance, reduced by 2. Just gained, 4 life and potentially a card's worth of value off these 2 equipment, if not more. So yeah, pretty nuts. Makes sense. I think we're both in agreement that kind of not surprised by that card sort of getting the flick. Mask of the Pouncing Lynx was the next one announced. This one was probably top of my list of cards that would get banned in the Blitz changes. Fire was so strong, and Pouncing Lynx just represented 5 damage on the table every single game.
Can't be doing that in Blitz. It's too good. Being able to just go snag your Lava Burst or go snag your Assault in the Wound. It's too much damage for a 20 to sub health format. It leads to effectively close to OTKs.
Yeah, this is and give a shout out to Nick Butcher who came up with this deck. But before the team calling, Nick had built up this Katsu deck in our testing that played Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. This is before Fire was even around, right? And did a Mask of the Pouncing Lynx 100 wins, Winds of Eternity line that just spat out ridiculous amounts of damage. Unfortunately, unlike Fire, you didn't have access to cards like Shuko at the time, and you had to Stubby Hammers, and you have it was a bit softer. But yeah, this card, since it's been printed, has been very, very good. And in Blitz, where it's just like you say, when it's in CC and it's on the table and it's a flip of 4 or 5 damage, that's only 10 to 15% of life. When it's 25% of your life.
To be fair, in CC, it's still really, really good.
It is.
It's just like Blitz. Blitz, the life totals are just too little. It's too much value off of a single piece of equipment. Like you said, there's that threshold of how much you can get out of a piece of equipment in Blitz, and if it's 4+, that's a lot.
Yep, it's too little. All right, Brendan, I'm going to give you this one. Brendan, you got a lot to say about this one, so I'll lead in with some of because this one has the biggest paragraph. So I'm just going to recap some points from LSS on this one. But Storm Striders is suspended until the next ban suspended announcement on November 9th. And do just want to give a couple of things about this, and then I'll let you riff off those as well. So while there's been little public play outside of armor events for Blitz format since our last BNS announcement, existing internal data and data from Skirmish Season 5 has begun to point towards an increasing gulf in performance between the Wizard class and the rest of the Blitz heroes. Stormstrider's activated ability goes even further than the virtual card advantage of other equipment discussed, so basically what we've just talked about, as it often provides Wizard the equivalent of an entire extra turn. If you don't know why, just go and watch a game of Wizard being played, but it's pretty upfront. Despite the fact Stormstriders is an iconic part of Wizard Toolkit and one that we don't necessarily want to say goodbye to forever, so etc. Stormstriders might come back. Go for it, Brendan.
Yeah, if you're going to tell me Stormstriders died for the sins of Icelander because Icelander is going to be too powerful in Blitz, okay, you have somewhat of an argument. But Kano is a deck that is fundamentally underpowered and plays way below curve. And it does this, and the reason it can be successful at all is because at some point in the game, it can take 2 turns in a row. That's it. And even by doing that, it's on par with other decks. Kano is also a deck that, despite being underpowered and all of its attacks being underpowered, it makes up for this in multiplicative damage effects that are kind of take it to account when the opponent does not respect the Kano player, whether it is through not blocking with Arcane Barrier or not having Arcane Barrier at all, or not adding Spell Void, which people don't do, by the way. So the best way to beat Kano, by the way, is not to play Oldhim and play Steadfast. It's to play Briar and then have all Spell Void equipment. It's virtually unwinnable for the Kano player. But you know what? People don't have this in their deck. They don't play them. You all know why? Because Kano is not that hard of a matchup and it's not that successful as a deck. Is it a pet deck of a lot of people and have people been successful with it? Yes, but I could count those people on my fingers. I swear. And at the same time, it still has a terrible conversion rate. It's never been dominant. This ban does not represent reality in the Blitz format whatsoever. I don't care what their internal data is. It is just not what happens in real flesh and blood. And I think that it's got to be an Icelander thing, or they just see this and they see it's powerful and they're like, okay, we'll just ban it. But I just don't think that there's a lot of thought if it's targeted at Kano. And I think that internal data does not represent the external data by the entire rest of the player base. So I'm surprised and disappointed because Kano is effectively living legend with this. Your Kano is trash. It cannot be played. Like I said, it's way below curve. It's way underpowered in terms of its actual numbers, and it makes up for that by being able to play 2 turns in a row. Yeah, and 15 life, but it has to play the 2 turns in a row. That's what Kano is. So they take this away. Kano is not playable in Blitz, I promise. Like, you may be able to high roll some people by just ripping off the top, but you effectively have no arsenal. How is that? Like, a more eloquent ban for Kano would have been Ragamuffin's Hat. It's a very powerful card. Very, very powerful. Nets you multiple resources, and it's just like, I think, objectively better than Talismanic Lens. I would have been disappointed if they banned that, but it would have been a bit more eloquent. Stormstriders is just way too much. It's way over the top, and it just neuters Kano. But the only argument I can see is that Icelander was too powerful, which is what I've heard. People have told me that Icelander was too powerful on Blitz. I didn't get a lot of experience with it, so I really can't speak to a lot there. That being said, if Icelander was the problem, I don't think you go for Stormstriders. It's way too detrimental to Kano. So I think if they're going to make a choice like that, they had to be thinking about Kano as well. And I think that thinking was flawed.
Yeah. So I'm just going to throw, we're going to take the traditional Brendan and Hayden roles here. You've already went straight into it, Brendan. So thank you for the start. And I'll give my summary at the end anyway, because I think, there's a few things I want to throw your way. Points of maybe contention or reasons for this. So first one, I guess, would be, the enjoyability of playing against a card like Stormstriders. And because we know from the past actions taken in the ban suspension announcements that enjoyability and playability of the game has been cited as a reason for some of these, enjoyability effectively for the ban suspensions. So do you think this is relevant, or do you think this came into the thinking in Stormstriders?
Yeah, I actually do think it came to the thinking, but then again, I think it was super myopic to look at Stormstriders, because you look at the rest of the freaking format, you have Rhinar killing you on turn 0 by taking your entire hand away and intimidating you. You have Oldhim just ultra fatiguing you sometimes. Like, there is plenty of unfun things happening in Blitz, and plenty of way less interactive things at that. It's just, do I think that Blitz should just be fundamentally uninteractive and kind of a format full of tomfoolery? No, but you don't have to but at the same time, I don't think that there should be a bias that points at something like Wizard and just neuters that class while leaving in so many other very, very unfun things, like Blood on Her Hands combo. What's fun about that? It's not really fun. You just kind of sit there and you die if they get enough copper and they draw the cards, right? Like,
you can interact with that, right?
Yeah, you can interact with it, but there is a certain damage threshold where you are just dead either way. But if we want to talk about literal non-interactivity, there's literally Rhinar is a perfect example of that. It's a powerful deck. It did very well prior to the team tournament.
It didn't.
Team tournament a bit. Well, it won. It almost won. It was winning. I guess I was looking at the battle hards before that, because Rhinar was doing really well. Your Rhinar list was particularly piloted by a lot of players down here when we had a couple of battle hardens, and it seemed like it was.
I think you could say results. It was probably putting up similar results to what Kano was. It was hitting some top 8s. It was winning some skirmishes.
Well, this is the Viscerai format. So there was like no other options other than Viscerai, and Rhinar was one of the only ones that was being played outside of Viscerai. And then there was Kasai, which literally had no game into Viscerai. I don't even know why it's being played. And there was Oldhim, and Oldhim still kind of lost.
I still feel that way about Kasai. So
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad deck for sure.
So it looks a lot better with these bans that we get to buff, which we'll talk about. What about, okay, so we talked about that, like, enjoyability factor. I think that's definitely a part of it. And, I've heard people talk about, I can't get to play a game, my opponent has a turn and they have another turn and it's like being time walked. It's just not enjoyable. I can see that perspective. What about, I guess, the perspective, you talked about degeneracy, and I guess these decks that just kind of do busted things and aren't interactive. And you cited Rhinar, you cited I guess Fatigue Ultim, right? Which was, that deck was like doing a number on the format. So Seeds gets banned, right? So you could say they have taken action towards these decks, and if it's a fact of like, well, Icelander is so oppressive with what it does from a disruptive standpoint, and then just has this in-game combo. You know, like I get what you're saying about, well, look at other cards, but what other cards would you look at in Icelander then?
That's a tough one. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of experience with the Icelander deck in Blitz, so it's super hard for me to say. This is information I'm receiving sort of post-mortem from Stormstriders. People are like, oh yeah, Icelander was actually what was broken. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have a lot of experience with this, so I'm just going to take your word on it. But I just think that like you could ban like literally anything else because you just absolutely neutered Kano by doing this. So there's no, if they actually ban Stormstriders only because of Icelander and no consideration for, you know, how good Kano was or how it would affect Kano, then it's a terrible decision on their part because they ruined the class. So I think that they did consider it, and it is also targeted at Kano. I don't think that Stormstriders is actually a degenerate card. I think that Kano trades. He trades for having this Stormstriders kind of double turn by, you know, his average, like his damage he's presenting with like one of the most powerful spells, like the Voltic Bolt, is like 5. It's so bad, right? And you can block it, and you can have permanent equipment that just like auto blocks it, Spell Void. You don't have to pitch for it. And of course, there's cards that have entered the format like Oasis Respite. I mean, he was in a tougher spot than he's been. So yeah, I just don't think that Stormstriders are fundamentally degenerate. I think that they do play the game on a different axis, right? There's nothing else in the game that can sort of be similar to Stormstriders. Nothing else gives you 2 turns in a row. So yeah, I do understand that part.
I think, so 2 more questions, but one thing I do want to point out is one thing that's not really discussed when it comes to the kind of power of Wizards is the opportunity cost of equipment. So we just talked about 2 pieces of equipment before Stormstriders that has been banned in Pouncing Lynx and Skalata, and just the power of those pieces of equipment. There's also other things in the format, like Goliath Gauntlet represents, you know, 10% of health. Like there's other cards that are really strong and enable, you know, you to do things. Vest the First still around. All these things. To play Nalrune or Spell Void, as you say, like that is an opportunity cost for what your deck wants to do and the power that equipment represents in a format like Blitz that's fast paced. So I do think that is like relevant, but you know, it's just something that I think doesn't always get brought up when you talk about the power of Wizards. And I think it's more relevant for potentially Kano than it is Icelander. But what about I guess, and I don't know if there's an argument that's been made, but I'm going to make it right now, or at least throw it your way, that the World Championship is the pinnacle of organized play and the top players in the world meeting together to play. And the power that is represented in a card like Stormstriders can be unlocked by players who are very good and consistently, you know, because I guess one of my views on playing a deck like Kano and Blitz is like, you could win basically any game, but you could also lose basically any game. And, you know, Stormstriders enables this.
Yeah, that's called a good game design. That's the thing. It's like that's where you want to be as a Flesh and Blood player. It's like you can lose, like you put yourself in a position where you can lose games, but you can also always win games through tighter play or just sheer luck. Sometimes, like sometimes you have to go for those lines. I do think there's one thing to consider about Wizard, and that's not playability, not good players playing Worlds. It's viewability. I think the viewability of Wizard is quite low, right?
Here we go.
From a
Now we're
viewer
touching
standpoint,
on it.
Not only do viewers not understand most of the card text on Wizard cards because Wizard is so atypical from the rest of the hero design in Flesh and Blood, people don't even, you know, it's like kind of the last thing you go over. It's like sort of the last pinnacle of becoming a Flesh and Blood player is like, oh, I need to actually learn what the words say on the Wizard cards. So the viewability is quite low because of that, because nobody recognizes it. It's sort of a niche hero, so not a lot of people play it. And I mean, you're watching a game of Wizard. Whose turn is it? What's going on? How much damage did he take? How much is the wildfire pumping? Like all this stuff. It's terrible for viewability. Is that why they banned it? I'd like to think. I hope not, to be honest. But maybe, you know, it does. I will 100% be on the side that Wizard is terrible at viewability. Me and you together actually cast a Blitz calling long time ago, and we had to commentate some Wizard games. I thought that they were some of the fun. Yeah, I thought that. Well, I remember like Jason Long playing. Like I thought that those were some of the most fun games that we commented. But at the same time, like, yeah, I mean, it's generally nobody really knows what turn it's on, whose turn it is, and then kind of just like sometimes the Wizard dies, and sometimes the other player just dies out of nowhere, and nobody knows what happened.
Yeah, I do want to. I think from my side, like the viewability is, and I guess the coverage aspect of World Championship being before Dynasty. Realistically, if there was no change in the ban suspend announcement, nothing changes before. I mean, some things change. We'll talk about Classic Constructor because that format feels like it's evolving. But Blitz 5 felt great, Islander felt great, etc., etc. So I think part of this is a shake up to the format, and they've said they want to flux cards in and out. So I'm glad that Storm Striders is suspended and not banned. I think for me, but I will say, Brendan, I'm okay with this ban, the suspension. I think it represents an interesting pivot to the format. I think I was pretty close to snap playing Kano in Blitz if this didn't happen. I think it's super, super powerful. And my viewpoint is I think that Storm Striders are a bit too powerful in Blitz. So I know you're going to defriend me and block me on Twitter for this, Brendan. You've been vowing to me that you'll do it. But I am okay with the suspension, but I think if it had been banned, I would have been upset because I think it's a cool card. It is the cornerstone of what Wizard is, and to lose that card permanently would be sad.
Yeah, I think of a lot of people that talk about the power of Kano talk about it from more of a theory perspective. Like you said, you're like, I would have locked it in. I actually kind of don't believe you because for one, you haven't tested it, and you definitely haven't tested it enough. You
have so much Kano Blitz.
You haven't done enough Blitz testing to lock in your deck, and the format has definitely not been explored by your testing team. So you could think that you're going to lock it in, but absolutely there could be things that are more powerful, more consistent, and are just not going to run you into mono Aces or Spite, which is probably what a lot of the field is going to look like, or mono Spell Void because people are expecting Kano, and the aggro decks running Spell Void will just run over him. So I think that I'll level with you. I think that Kano is a powerful deck. But I don't think it was. I don't think it was potentially the most powerful deck. At the same time, I think that by playing Kano, you were putting so much risk up round to round as well that it might not have been the deck that you want to bring to a
perceived risk. Though every deck has risk. Like this is the argument I hate about Kano. People are like, oh, you've got to be brave to play Kano. You start at 5 less life. It's like you've got to be brave to play any deck that just doesn't have like a 60 or 50% win rate. Like any deck that like has to take like angles of attack that are different to just playing your cards out and like the 15 life is irrelevant.
It's more of that you have really large swings in some matchups, and I think that some of the more powerful Rune Blades running like the Spell Void equipment that they can get quite easily are very, very hard matchups for you. It's hard to deal with things like Dash, which are ridiculous with Tekla Pounder, and you basically have no game into Rhinar if they get a relatively decent hand early.
It's a buy. It was like one of Kano's best matchups.
Contingent being there if they get the hand, so like they on the play intimidate, you die. You 4-card hand, no arsenal. There's pretty much no interaction you can do. You're at 15 life. It doesn't take them a lot to just kill you in OTK. But your main problem is Kano is going to be Rune Blades, and then like you said, you say Ultim's a buy, but you're going to have to do very intricate deck stacks versus Ultim. If the Ultim decks get more aggressive and they do somewhat get more disruptive, then maybe it's a bit harder. But yeah, I think it was going to be a good deck. I do not think it would be the most played deck at Worlds. I don't even think it would be the 4th most played deck, to be honest. I think it would be 5 or below, just because people are preferential against Kano. And yeah, like it can really struggle against some of those aggressive decks.
All right.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, last question then, Brennan, is are you biased?
Am I biased? Yeah, I think that like I said, when I said that I wouldn't play the Battle Hardened Blitz event here in Dallas, it's not because I think that Blitz is now going to be like an abysmal format, although I have been joking on Twitter with like Zach Blunt, be like, I agree with you now, Blitz is a terrible format. It's just like, that was the only thing I actually enjoyed doing in Blitz. I thought it was very cerebral. I felt like I had a lot of agency as a player, and I felt like it was a very rewarding path, starting Kano a long, long time ago. And I'm not a big role player in Flesh and Blood, but I definitely identified as sort of a Wizard player in something like Blitz, which is a more casual format. So personally, I'm devastated for this suspension. I hope that it reverts. I do think this is very core to the identity of Kano. And yeah, I think that they absolutely neutered the hero on Blitz by doing this.
I do recall Auckland Blitz calling 2021, and you doing coverage, Brendan, and someone just slipping into the chat room, into the Discord room while we're doing commentary and just whispering, Brennan Patrick, and then it's just been. Do
you remember that I also didn't know what any of the Wizard cards did?
I remember carrying you on my shoulders.
He's like, what do you think Jason has to do to get out of this place? I was like, well, Hayden, if I was a calling champion, I would know, but why don't you take it away? I'm just like, I don't even know what the cards say.
Okay. Blitz done and dusted. Obviously, so much to see as we head to Worlds. It's going to be super interesting. I'm more excited to test Blitz now than I was. And I know you just said, I hadn't tested Blitz, or how can I make this claim that I would have played? I was probably planning to spend less time on Blitz than I will now, because I just had this, what's the word I'm looking for?
Misconception?
No. I was so strong in my belief of how good I thought Kano was in Blitz that it was like, there was only a couple of decks I was considering, but I will now be testing a lot more. Let's talk about Classic Constructed, because it's been the format in the spotlight, right? We've just finished national season, has actually wrapped up, because this last weekend we had German nationals and Singaporean nationals. Singapore nationals, by the way, the third largest national championships, 190 players, Brendan, in Singapore. I want to make sure I got that correct. They haven't 111. I don't know why I said 100. I think I meant 119, but it was 111. So third largest behind the US and Canada. Do you just want to shout out quickly Gordon Ko on Ultim Wings Singapore, and in Germany, Christopher Bizarre on Icelander, taking it out against Viscerai in the final. So our final two.
Viscerai.
What's that?
There's Viscerai in the finals. How did he get up there?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but the week before, 3 of Viscerai's won nationals, Brendan.
Oh my god.
We're going to talk about at the end of this show the current snapshot of the Classic Constructor format, because I think it's very interesting.
It's evolving. It's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Evolving. And
depending on which bubble, and I will say this, bubble you live in around the world, you're going to think the meta is a lot different to what it actually looks like globally. So we're definitely going to talk about that. And Battle Hard in Minneapolis happened this past weekend as well. Shout out to Michael Feng on Ultim winning that. Man, just making sure everyone knows that he's not gone anywhere. He's still right here and ready to play some Flesh and Blood.
He's going to be sleeping in my office this weekend.
Exciting. Well, say hello from me. Class Constructed. The ban is Pulse of Eisenloft, and I do just want to cover a little bit about what's said by LSS in this ban announcement. It's friggin' massive, so I won't dive too deep into it. Go have a look on FABTCG.com if you want the full sort of philosophy as they talk about. But basically, they say, with Ultim winning the most number of national championships, this ban on Pulse of Eisenloft is a way to dock Ultim's. It has slightly too many favorable matchups, and importantly, its win rate improved as the season progressed and decklist and player knowledge optimized. I don't actually think that's true when you look at the third week of results, but that's interesting. It's been this tournament staple for years, and it's about trying to fundamentally reshape the format and nudging a slight curb to the percentage points of Oldham, a couple of percentage points to say of Oldham's win rate to the consistent advantage that Oldham has, which Pulse of Eisenloft, every time you see that card, it's minimum worth 2 life, right? Like the card is always very strong, whether you draw it on offense or defense. It can represent an Oaken Fuse, it can represent 2 life plus an Ice React. It can obviously just be a defensive reaction at some point. And if you get into multiple cycles of the game, as more, defensive Ultims can, that's a lot of advantage you start to accrue. So the ban, I guess what they're saying is that you just take that away a little bit. It's one card that does that. Doesn't impact the class necessarily overall, and the game plans that are still being enacted can still potentially be enacted.
Yeah, it turns Oaken to Raging Onslaught, effectively.
I mean, you can still fuse it. You just have to draw.
You can. Yeah, you can. And
so
Kasai is a good deck. Good.
And Storm Striders is, Anyway, I do just want to point out some of the philosophy that LSS do bring up in this article as well on the banner suspended announcement, which is that this philosophy towards using banner suspended lists is threefold. So I do just want to cover that because it talks about some of the things we've just discussed as well. That sometimes they need to use it to address current card interactions. Let's talk about Quillhand and Scalata, for instance. Create negative play experience or degenerate ones. Sometimes it's because they messed up. Good to see that they do say that. Do you remember Dustblade? And sometimes it's to actively manage the format. And this, they say Pulse of Eisenloft is the third one. It's to actively manage the format and reduce this win rate, as they say. So I guess, what did you think was going to happen from this ban suspended announcement for Classic Constructed? My viewpoint was that likely something was going to happen because I felt they wanted to inject something or change something before Worlds for coverage purposes, for the environment, considering Dynasty won't be released. But my opinion was that we didn't really need to see anything banned.
I don't think we needed to either. And yeah, it did feel a bit. I don't know if it felt forced, but yeah, we could have gone without it. I think the format would have been fine. Yeah, Classic Constructor is pretty interesting. I don't think that Legend Story Studios is willing to ban a Legendary in Classic Constructed unless there's pretty egregious things happening. And I do think a better ban would have been Crown of Seeds, to be honest. I think that card is a problem card that will probably get banned eventually, or Oldhim will turbo Living Legend out. But yeah, we hit Pulls and Iseloft instead. Does it affect the Oldhim deck? Yes. Does it shave percentage points off? I think it's pretty minimal, to be honest. I don't think it's like massive. I still think that Oldhim will be a very good deck. I wouldn't have been surprised to see a Belittle ban as well, just because of how it affects the core tenets of the game, as they would say. But Belittle's not it's not in the Oldhim deck, so it's maybe not oppressive. I do think that Fi is a very, very good deck that is kind of being slept on, I guess, and also Belittle Fi, because that really dunks on Icelander, and if it can beat Oldhim, so if it has a strategy to beat a more defensive Oldhim deck, I think it's going to be in a very, very good place. I think it is sort of the premier aggro deck of this format. But ultimately, how do I feel about this Class Constructor ban? It's fine. I think that they took some marginal advantage off the quote unquote best deck in the format. So
yeah. I mean, that's the intention, and I think that's going to be the result. To be honest, as of what they've done. I will say, the Pulse of Isenloft ban, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense to me. But also, the more I think it is quite a huge impact to Ultim. The more I think about just the way Oldhim plays, the way you want to be able to play it. This big advantage that Oldhim has in this format is that it can play its turn cycles aggressively or defensively and always be pretty strong to net or be positive in that turn cycle, which is really, really powerful. Like, it's really hard to have a deck that can be net with another deck that you're playing against or over in a turn cycle, whether you're defensive or offensive. It generally has to be one way or the other, and that's Runeblades, right? They can often, because of Resilience, net positive a turn cycle. But on defense, that's really difficult to do. So if they get on the back foot versus an aggro mirror or even Ultim that's playing pummels and fusing Oakenolds, which of course now is harder to do, can be difficult. So I think this loss of Pulse really does hit Oakenold. And even if you're playing the defensive version, where you're less focused on maybe these fusing of Oakenolds, like, you've just lost a card that gains you 2+ life every game, which is a pretty big advantage in a format that's pretty tight right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2+ for sure, because the Ice React is so non-zero.
And that's just one cycle.
I think it's a good card. It's a hard puzzle to solve, Hayden, because I agree with you, and I think the Classic Constructed meta is still evolving, right? And like you said, it's very regional based. Like, I've seen Icelander have a lot of success. I've also seen Icelander not have success. I've seen Fi have success, seen it not. But I think the deck that has kind of had cross region success is Oldhim, right? You had Christian Hawk at German Nationals go 12-0 on it. I mean, it's a good deck.
I went 6-0, but yeah.
I thought it was 12-0.
Well, he went 6-0 on Ultim and 6-0 in Limited.
Yes.
Mixed format. That's one thing I do want to point out is we talk about these Nationals results, but it is important to remember that these are mixed format events, they're not just purely constructed, and it has to be, no matter how much you want to weight that impact, it is an impact, and it's a consideration, it's a factor, it's a variable that you need to take into account. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, what happens with Ultim. So Ultim has been, from the national season, the winningest deck, has had the most nationals wins. Where does Ultim go in terms of now to Worlds? Like, does the deck shift at all? Does it look different, or is it just a literal case of what LCS have tried to do here, and it's gonna look the same for the most part? Maybe we'll see some innovation just because of the format anyway, but people will probably go about their business just with maybe a slightly less win rate than they had previously.
Yeah, I think the latter. I think the same for the most part.
I don't know. I'm interested to see. Like I said before, the more I think about it, the bigger I do think this ban of Pulse is, and it's going to be interesting to see like what the representation of Oldhim now at Worlds, and I think that's only going to come from teams testing to see how big this impact is, because a lot of teams could turn around and go, you know what, the impact is somewhat, but also, hey, look, we found this other thing that we think we could be doing in this perceived format, and Oldhim is better than, you know, it was in the last format for whatever reason, or, you know, it could be the opposite, and hey, you know, the pulse ban coupled with kind of the shifting format, Oldhim is not where we want to be. So I could see Oldhim swing from, you know, overwhelmingly be the most represented deck at Worlds to, you know, even being like the fourth, fifth, maybe not fifth, probably third or fourth most represented deck at Worlds pretty easily, which is interesting.
Yeah. It's so hard to say because we obviously have the Dallas Battle Hardened this week, in which the I think, let me just make sure my dates are correct, but I think that the bans will be live. Yeah, they will.
They will be. Yeah.
Yeah. For what it's worth. So we will have some tournaments in the interim to get data prior to Worlds to kind of see how this CC format continues to shake out.
I think it's going to be super important, actually. I think, is this the last? No, there's one more Battle Hardened between Worlds and this, I think. Is that right? I'm
not the guy to ask. I just got the Dallas one on my calendar.
Brendan's like, what events am I going to? Those are the ones I know about. I thought there was potentially one more Battle Hardened before. I'm going to look and then come back, because I know there's January events that have already been announced, but I'm not sure if there's, I think Minneapolis, I think this might be the last one before Worlds. So let's talk about this, because we've talked about, we've said it multiple times, evolving meta. So what's your kind of take on this idea of an evolving meta? Like, a lot of people would say, no, it's an Ultim meta. Ultim has been the dominant deck, and then it's Icelander. Look at US Nationals, and then Fire's been in there. But does Fire really beat Ultim? This debate rages on. Is that not the format, Brendan? Like, what is this evolving format that you speak of? Well, I speak of.
Like you said, Viserai is seeing some results. I still think that Briar is probably a legit deck. We saw Dramai see some results as well, although it started to fade a bit, and I think that it will fade in lieu of Fi coming, showing up more in the format. But we had Rhinar take down a freaking Nationals, and yeah, I think that you can play most decks in this format and be relatively competent. Where in the last format, if you brought the wrong deck, you would just get rolled every game pretty much. I feel like it was very narrow. Here, it's yeah, if I bring Rhinar, I might not be bringing the objectively most powerful deck in the room, but I can still take down a tournament.
Yeah,
sort of.
Look, we had Alexi win an event. Let's just look at the snapshot of the full season data, because I think this is it's really interesting. I was a bit surprised when I looked at this, just based on the narratives that I'm hearing and what people are saying, and kind of the discourse that you hear about where the kind of meta is right now. And a deck that doesn't get talked about very much, but let's just go through wins. So first place, Ultim, no surprise, has in the end 30% of the wins for the national season. So it is by far and away the winningest deck of this format. And I think in terms of top 8 representation as well, it's narrowly the most represented deck in top 8. But second, when it comes to percentage of wins, is Briar, 22% or 21%, and in fact had the most representation at these events. It was the number 1 most played deck at Nationals in the metagame, and the second most in terms of wins, and the second most in terms of top 8s as well. Yet seems to be a deck that's forgotten by a large chunk of the discourse that's happening through Twitter, through Discord, through this kind of discussion of an Ultim format, an Icelander format, a Fire format, and yet here's Briar being, at the end of national season, the deck the hero that's put up the second highest number of wins in top 8s.
Yeah, and it's still very, very powerful. I mean, honestly, not that much changed since the Pro Tour, except Oldhim is now able to roam a bit more free. Is that enough to really just? I mean, obviously Icelander as well. Icelander had a little auto loss into freaking Prism, but are those decks enough to keep down the menace that was Briar? I mean, the format seems to think so. I myself slightly have my doubts.
Well, the results say otherwise, right? This is the thing, is that, and we say this, right? Not wanting to be results oriented. That also goes for I think ways to look at data as well, right? You need to understand the background of the data, but let's talk about the events that define, I think, the discourse around this metagame right now, and they of course are the big events, right? It's US Nationals, it's New Zealand Nationals, it's I think German Nationals, of course, is really interesting. Polish Polish as well. These are the events that probably UK, because obviously people see the stream. Those are probably the 5 events. That's 3 Ultims, a Canadian, as well. So six events there. So that's 4 Ultims, a Fire, and a Briar, right? I messed that up. 3 Ultim, an Icelander, a Fire, and a Briar, right? And of course, US Nats gets the most kind of visibility. It has the coverage treatment, the SCG coverage treatment. And that's kind of, I think, where the conversation happens, right? But then, you go and look at the full data across all the events, including a lot of mid-sized events, and data says otherwise. Like Icelander, I'll keep going down the list, Brendan, just to give the kind of insight here. Icelander is not the third sort of most represented or winning deck. Viserai is the deck that won the third highest number of nationals. It was 15% of the total win share. And then afterwards it is Icelander and then Fire after that. So those are the top 5 in the meta, but maybe in an order that people wouldn't have thought. And I just want to talk about representation because quite funny to me, because this is a conversation we've had a few times about Prism, and it just always seems to show up, and another cheeky illusionist seems to just keep showing up. So Briar was the most played deck. Ultim was the second most played deck at Nationals this season. Fire was the third most interesting. And then the fourth most was Dramai, Brendan. And then fifth was Viserai. Yeah. And then sixth was Icelander.
Illusionist just has a way of just converting. We'll say that.
I mean...
lack thereof.
has a way of showing up. There was so much Dramai at US Nationals. I couldn't believe it. But that is kind of the snapshot of the meta. So I want to say from here, Brendan, based on the data, maybe let's move away from just the common discourse. Based on the data, what do you actually expect to happen this weekend at the Battleharden, and I guess over the next few weeks as we lead into the World Championships? Where does the meta move from here? How do things shift?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot of Fi, to be honest, because obviously this data is a bit more encompassing, but I've just seen the top 8 sort of percentage, there's been a lot of Fis in top 8s, and it seems to be more and more and more. You saw this as Michael Fang progressed through both of these battle hardens. He posted the results, and it seemed in the first one there was 3 or 4 Fis, and then we got up to I think it was also 3 or 4 Fis. So there seems to be a lot of Fi running around. I also think that's a deck that people sort of resonate with coming out of that aggressive format. I have not seen, Briar obviously being played if we look at the data, but I just don't think that Briar is really going to show up. Surprisingly, I still think it's a really good deck, but I think that Fi is going to sort of trump it as the go-to aggro deck, at least in the mind of the people. I don't know if that's true in terms of power level. I think Oldhim's still going to be very, very, very popular, and if it is going to fade, it's going to fade slowly. So looking at the data Battleharden, I do think that there's going to be a significant amount of Icelander, a significant amount of Oldhim. But if Oldhim is not the most played deck, I think the Fi will be the most played deck.
Yep. Yeah, I feel similarly. I feel like the decks that are going to emerge as especially in North America, where we've got this Battleharden, and of course the Calling and World Championship. Let's not forget the Calling of that weekend as well. So that's a massive event that's happening alongside World Championship. Ultim, Icelander, Fire. Those are what I expect to see, kind of, because they kind of form this almost I don't want to say triangle, but they're decks that are really interacting and vying, and builds are really important, so that the types of builds target those. So an Ultim that wants to run into an Icelander versus an Ultim that wants to run into a Fire can look very different, and same for a Fire, I think, as well. A card like Belittle, really, really important into Icelander for those resource gains, but how important is that card? Is it more about explosive turns and repetitive value of the Phoenix Flame against Ultim? So going to be super interesting to see. Any kind of, what about fringe players and stuff? Any kind of surprises in these? Obviously, Dramai being the 4th most played, I think is quite surprising. I think Viserai being the 3rd deck in terms of win percentage is really interesting as well. Where do you expect to see some of these fringe? I mean, is Viserai even fringe? Yeah. Where do you expect to see them play out?
So Viserai Old Faithful for sure. I think Dramai is just going to get bodied by Fi. And it's got a bad matchup into Oldhim as well. I think it has a good matchup into Icelander, but I don't think that's the deck to be targeting right now. I think we could see, more Briar come back. I think we could see more Dash. I think that people are starting to fade off Dorinthia, realizing that it's not the truth. It was just he surprised people, but it's not a very good deck. Rhinar, I think that's an option if you want to pick it. If you want to be contrarian and play that kind of deck, it's an option, but I don't think it's very good. And Lexi has the ability to come into the format, but if Oldhim's the most popular deck, I don't know if Lexi's sort of the play there.
Yeah, I can't see Lexi doing much in this format, unfortunately, not with Icelander and Ultim being so prevalent and then Dramai floating around the edges as well. I kind of agree. I think like Viserai is this deck that people see as a known quantity and know that it's consistent in their eyes and that it can have... I was listening to Michael Hamilton and Roger's podcast, and I think Roger said, it's just this deck that just I feel like I can win any game, and it's got like a 40 to 50% matchup into everything. And I think that's whether you look at it that way, that's kind of what it is. And it's like whether that's subconsciously that makes you pick that deck, or you actually are thinking about that proactively. I think that's a big reason that we see that deck continue to be played. And I mean, in terms of outperforming results, Viserai did the best. Actually has the best performance in terms of outperforming its share, so that's quite interesting. Of course, you got to take into account where these, the markets of these nationals and what the metagames look like, but very interesting. Dash is, you called out Dash. I think Dash is a big call out. We saw Jacob Barr in the top 8 of US nationals with that control Dash deck. Is that something that we see more if Ultim continues to be the deck to beat in this format? How does that go into Icelander 5, for instance? It seems really hard to pick a fringe deck that has a good matchup into 2 of the 3 decks. And that's where I think the issues are going to come. And that's why I think 2 of the 3 decks, the 3 decks being Fire, Ultim, Icelander, as we continue to talk about. And that's why I think a lot of people are just going to gravitate towards one of those 3 decks, because you can have a good matchup into one of them and a reasonable matchup into the other, I think, in some way, shape, or form. And if you pick one of these fringe decks, it's like, okay, I know that these 3 decks could be 50% of the meta. And if I have like not a good matchup into 2 of them, is that where you want to be? Like, that is a tough proposition, I think.
Yeah. I also want to point out that I think that me and you, just the way that we approach the game, what we enjoy in the game, we sort of have a natural bias against decks like Viserai. It's just not the way that we tend to approach playing competitive Flesh and Blood. We tend to gravitate towards decks that maybe have a bigger matchup spread in terms of win percentage, loss percentage, but maybe they can gear towards the current meta and have a big advantage of the decks that will be represented. But sort of these old faithful decks, I know you are a big Viserai player, but I think mentally we sort of shy away from them as soon as they kind of get into that 40 to 50 against everything range.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I definitely do, only if for the fact that I want to try and predict the metagame and try and spike that metagame to some degree. I mean, I've played those decks before. I played Viserai in Singapore. I played Briar at PT2, which I think kind of falls into that camp a little bit of, having certain matchups, but that was more about the deck list and the reason for playing Briar. So, but yeah, that's a good point. I do look to find something that has, I want to find the fringe deck that has 2 favorable matchups of the 3 decks we just talked about. Does it exist? So far in my testing, it's been no, but and I've tried some stuff. Brendan. But
yeah, but like, what is it's hard though, because like, what is quote unquote the meta? Like, what are we talking?
Exactly?
Because we're evolving, and so you see quite a different spread region to region, and it's going to be the World Championships. People from all over are coming. So like, what are we actually targeting?
It's true.
I don't think that there's an answer quite yet.
Yeah, that's why I do think this full season data is a lot more important than the kind of discourse we're seeing, because a lot of the discourse is focused around the North America and some of the traditional countries like Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, I think. So it's important that we don't lose sight of this full season data, because a lot of these players are going to be at the World Championships come November 4th. I guess the last thing I do want to say on this as well, you talked about kind of meta spread and what to expect as we head into this, is just like, how do you look at the metagame? Like, how does everyone approach this metagame as we go into it? Like, what is everyone's kind of viewpoints and thoughts? Like, are people just going to default to what they know and what they like to play? If you're going to the calling, like, how do you even predict the meta? Like, how quickly it is evolving? And the thing I want to point out is Talishar is showing us that things evolve quickly because people are getting access to at least some snapshot of some kind of meta, whether that's actually accurate or not. People are reacting to it. And I think that, in my viewpoint, that's why we saw so much Dramai at US Nationals, is that in people's opinion, they saw so much Ultim and they saw so much Icelander being played on Talishar. They felt Ultim could have a good matchup into that. They changed into Dramai. Ultimately, results weren't there, and I think that is another story to go down, which is about reps, preparation, and deck lists. But I think that is honestly why we saw Dramai shift so much. And like, I think Briar was like the 5th or 6th, like the 6th most played deck, and I think that comes from this like snapshot of what we see of like what the discourse is.
People are just over Briar. Like, I don't feel comfortable sort of speaking in depth about Briar quite yet, because I like from our test and from like my experience, I don't see what changed to make that deck suck so much. Like right now, I saw people on Twitter talk about like, oh, all the old Imps are running hypothermia now, yada yada. So like, yeah, maybe that's a thing, and but is that like that deck is a freaking menace? Like it is a deck to contend with. So yeah, I'm interested to see if Briar comes back because the power's still there.
Yeah, and I mean Viserai somewhere near that camp. Consistency still there. All right, Brendan, any final thoughts on ban suspended announcement? I mean, we did this last time, raised some controversy, so you know what? Let's do it again. If you were to give a grade to LSS on this ban suspended announcement out of 10, what are you giving them this time around, Brendan? Did we do 10 last time? Or did we do it? We'll go out of 10. I can't remember what we did last.
We'll go to 10. So it's really hard for me, because personally, and I am biased, I am gutted by the Stormstar suspensions. Like, it really hurts, and like it's the first time I feel like I've been emotionally affected by a by a ban decision.
People are going to light up the comments disagreeing with that one.
Yeah, I mean, like I enjoy playing that class or that hero in Blitz, and yeah, that's just my thing. So let's just talk. I'll try to approach it from if that wasn't my position. I would say out of 10, I'd probably give it. Like, it's so hard because I thought that I would have been okay if there's no changes. So I'll probably give it like a 6 or a 7, to be honest. Like I think shaking up Blitz is a good idea in like leading up to the World Championship. Pulse Weisenloft does feel a little underwhelming, but maybe it's enough. Like maybe there are decks that are so close behind that it is going to be enough to dethrone Oldhim. And if it is, I think that it's quite an eloquent ban. I really don't want to turbo trend back into the format that we had at PT2, which is a bunch of aggro decks that don't block, trying to see who can do the most damage to each other over like 3 to 4 turns. I think that that's not a good display of what Flesh and Blood is. And that's not where we were post PT2. It felt healthy because of that. But, if we do dethrone Oldhim, the aggro decks come out in force. They're running Belittle, so they're stomping over Icelander as well. We could quickly find our way back there. In which case, I would think that in my opinion, that would be a worse format. So I'll give this about a 6 or 7. Could have been a lot worse. I mean, definitely could not have been worse for Blitz. This is literally the worst case scenario. Doomsday, get in your bunker for me. Like, this is bad. We're starting to petition. Like, I'll send it out on Twitter. Like, it's bad. But outside of that, I like it. I like it. It's fun.
Did you see a protest while you're in France?
I did not see a protest while I was in France. I saw one while I was in Prague, and there was about 80,000 people 1 minute away from my apartment.
Yeah. The Europeans know how to protest. I'll tell you what. So you can learn something from that, and you can go and petition to LSS for your Storm Traders. When do we want it? Now. Why do we want it? Brendan Patrick says so. I'm going to give... I like your point about the kind of not hitting back to PT2 meta. I agree. I don't particularly like that meta, and I don't want to see a bunch of aggro decks running into each other's face and not blocking. But in saying that, like, I think the Pulse ban and the reasoning behind it, I get it, and I think it could make a lot of sense. I'm worried it actually might be too much, to be honest, and no ban might have been better. So, but otherwise, I really like the Blitz bans. Like, as I said, I don't feel the same way you do about Storm Traders. I feel, a little bit sad from a personal standpoint, but I get it. I'm a little bit worried that maybe they could have done something else and docked Icelander, like you said. So I'm going to go like a 7.5, 8. I'm going like an 8, just like a solid. I think there's a couple things that could have been done differently, but I think overall, like, this is going to change the Blitz format, and I'm glad they didn't just go and ban a couple of things in Class Construct. I think that could have ruined the format completely, which is I think they've used restraint there and used some smart decisions. So I'll give them an 8 even. How about that, Brendan?
It's been a nice change of pace from PT2 to the current format, and I think if they had made some more brash decisions and put us back in a similar aggressive format, Briar, no changes, Briar being the best deck again, and we're just doing the literal same thing we did PT2, would have been incredibly disappointing. So the fact that I don't think we are there, consider me content.
Cool. All right. That's going to do it for episode 78. Yep, 78 of Arsenal Pass, our sort of breakdown of the Spanish suspended announcement. Last thing I want to say is no Google review this week, Brendan. If you do want to get your Google review in, and we really appreciate it, these reviews help us out. You can go to ratethispodcast.com/Arsenal Pass. Let us know what you like about what we're doing, or flame us for our banner suspended announcement, but still just give us 5 stars because that's helpful. It does help us get out there to other people, potential listeners. We are approaching, we're getting close to 5,000 subs on YouTube, Brendan. So if you are listening to this on audio, or even you are watching the YouTube and you aren't currently subscribed to Arsenal Plus, please do so. It does help us out. We're very close to 5,000 subs now. If you want to catch us on Twitter, you can do so. @BN_Dale, Brendan APG. By the time this comes out, it's too late, but Brendan is doing a Twitter Spaces or Twitter Live tonight with Tarek Patel, I believe. So if you do hear this and want to go back and listen to it, I think it should be accessible on Twitter. If you go to like Tarek's page, you should be able to see it, talking about this ban and suspend announcement in more depth with a different perspective that isn't just, some welcome to Wraith boomers in the form of me and Brendan. I think Yuki's going to be on there as well. So always popular and always good to hear what Yuki has to say. I think that's going to do it for this week's pod. Brendan, anything else to say before we sign off?
That's it. Very excited for the World Championships. I mean, it's going to be a heck of a month leading up to that. Going to have our eyes glued to the data, see if the CC meta finally settles, and we can sort of try to predict the meta and pick our decks for the World Championships. Obviously, I will be on the casting side, but I think right now we're leading up to a potentially incredible event, right? We have a lot of narratives behind players going into it, things like Michael Hamilton, Pablo Pintor, everybody else as well. And then we also have this sort of undefined meta. So it's a very exciting time to be playing Flesh and Blood and to be competing. And I'm just really excited to be a part of it.
Yep. Best of luck this weekend in Battle Hardened Dallas, Brendan. I'll be looking for you on some sort of coverage, whether it just be Twitter coverage. I'm excited to see what this meta looks like. Brendan, make sure you get a snapshot for us and you can tell us all about it next week on the pod. But for this week, that's it. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.